invisible threat sort of has invisible carry-on effects, and it's something that has knock-on impacts on how we breathe, where our health is sort of beyond just the direct impacts of health. So, Keith, so thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to turn it over to you. Paloma Greenwald is an Arizona public health professional with 25 years of nursing experience, specializing in Spanish-speaking populations, school nursing, elder care, and climate health initiatives. The same question to you. How are you seeing the quote invisible impacts of heat becoming very visible in the many communities that you serve with?
When I began my nursing career, I knew that it was a privilege, right, to serve my community, to bring health and optimal wellness to the people around me. I came to learn over consistent patterns in all different states and cities that it was also a privilege to be a bridge, take their experiences, the experiences of my patients, and bring that voice to elected officials for public policy changes that can protect all of us. I knew that in my first school nurse job, I had a little drawer in my big wooden kind of like a librarian desk. And I had 3 inhalers and a little pencil drawer that I could lock up. In my practice, as recently as about 3 years ago, all schools have transitioned, pretty much all of them, to shoe organizers on top of the doors that hold 24 or more slots for asthma inhalers. In the same community, within just a few miles, the same number of students in 20 years. That's the expanse and effect of bad air quality on developing kids. Air quality is exacerbated by high heat, by air pressures that hold the pollutants down at lower levels. So average regular people on the street are absorbing these pollutants at higher rates, and they're expanding deeper into our bodies. I was responsible for the health of these little kids, and I couldn't, in good conscience, let them play outside. Such a simple act that I want to believe everyone in this space has enjoyed, just going out for a 15-20 minute recess, and more kids can't afford the luxury of play. They can't build their emotional, social, developmental interactions because they're in my office at 5, 6 years old, waiting out this horrible heat over and over on a daily basis. And it deserves attention. And I've got plenty more where that came from.
Yeah. And I have a 2-year-old who just recently like went through his own kind of first bout of asthma. And it's so scary to see that just as a like little blip, that to imagine just like a classroom full of kids, a solvable problem, experiencing that over and over again. And it is a real thing. So we're gonna in a second we'll kind of bring this back to a little bit more of an interactive discussion. We've done a little bit of sort of awareness raising of some of the hidden impacts of heat on communities, and we could leave and pat ourselves on the back for raising awareness, but I think everybody is here. We're kind of done and over raising awareness. We'd actually like to do some shit, and so that requires the leadership have the tools of government at their disposal. And I'm really honored to be joined by one of them today. Representative Adelita Grijalva has been representing the Arizona 7th District since November of last year, though it should have been September. She is a lifelong public servant, advocate, and resident of Southern Arizona, and is actively fighting extreme heat and climate change. And so, Representative, now I'd like to turn it to you both to share your perspectives as a resident of heat impacted communities, and also as somebody who's trying to switch from awareness raising mode into doing and solutions.
Well, thank you. Thank you everyone for being here. I think the conversation is really important. And even when we were talking about this being outdoors, even here in DC at this time, you would think that it's going to be really lovely. And we were just outdoors 2 weeks ago where it was very hot. And so, having lived in Southern Arizona my whole life, everyone else like, well, Arizona is hot. Yeah, thank you. But climate change is real, and having consistently temperatures in triple digits for months on end is not healthy. Our bodies are not meant to absorb that kind of heat consistently. And so when you look at the impact of students, I was on a school board for 20 years. Regularly, we'd have to do heat advisories where children are not allowed to go outside. I was on the Pima County Board of Supervisors, and we passed a countywide heat protection ordinance in the county because the state doesn't give us that kind of direction. And we're worried. I mean, when you have an increased number of skin cancers and the employees that are out, their job is to be outdoors. They can't change their job description. So when you have people that are working on construction, people that are maintaining our parks, people that are maintaining our wastewater facilities, and this is in every single local community that are getting increased situations where we have skin cancers, like the little divot that I have here. We all have them in Arizona, and that's not healthy. It's not normal. And so when we're looking at this, it's not a seasonal inconvenience. It is something that is happening with more urgency every single year. And this is not, when you look at these extreme heat situations that happen pretty often, there are people that you can't just simply adapt through willpower. You you're going to be ill. And once you have heat exhaustion, once you're dehydrated, your body is more likely to get there faster. And so, in the ways that we try to prevent those kind of situations, it's incredibly difficult because delivery drivers can't stop making deliveries. Construction workers can't stop building homes and projects. Families can't stop paying their electric bills because it's inconvenient and because we can't afford it. And seniors, children, and people with disabilities and unhoused individuals simply just can't escape the heat. So what we need to do is we have to acknowledge that climate change is real. Hi everyone, it's a reality. It's where we are. And so we cannot we extreme heat is a public health issue, and that's how we passed it in Pima County. It's a worker safety issue, it's a housing issue, it's an environmental justice issue, and frankly, it's also a political choice. So we know what saves lives: cooling centers, shade, trees, and energy assistant works. We also know that affordable and efficient housing works. And so when this administration is consistently trying to roll back those protections, they're trying to take away, we actually voted on the Shower Act. In my 5th month here, the Shower Act. I wish it meant something, like, is an acronym for something. No, it was literally taking water saving requirements from shower heads. We voted on that on the House floor. 2 weeks later, we voted on taking energy efficiency requirements away from appliances. So this administration is actively trying to make it where every protection that we've ever looked at is gone. And I am part of the Environmental Justice Caucus. Myself, Talib, and Summer Lee, we are doing this together as 3 women of color that represent districts that are dealing with an incredible environmental justice situation. And when we look at those things, my dad worked for literally his entire time in Congress for 20 years in environmental justice work. And we have to redo the bill that had so much investment from different communities, different organizations, because all of the protections from the federal agencies that were created to look out for us are gone. So we have to rebuild. And that is where I think that we need to demand federal investment in cooling centers, community resilience hubs, tree canopy expansion, heat ready infrastructure, emergency preparedness. These are not just luxury projects, they're life saving investments. And we want to see action, plain and simple.
Thank you so much for that, Representative. And I know you'll have to leave in a couple of minutes. And so I just did want, but though we're gonna swap you out with equally badass leader from
Amazing.
but before you leave, I wanted to hear more from you. You said, from Arizona, so obviously a place with a long history of dealing with both heat impacts and also pioneering heat solutions. there's a lot of places in this country that don't have that experience, but are rapidly finding themselves needing to level up. I mentioned, for instance, in Philadelphia, where kids are being sent home from school as soon as it hits like 80 because the schools just simply aren't equipped with HVAC. And so I'm curious how you're seeing the conversation around heat evolve in DC, and when you talk to your colleagues who represent other geographies, how is heat starting to come onto the radar screen for them, and how do you need to sort of message about heat differently in order to reinforce that this isn't just a Southwest issue, it's a
No.
national.
No, I think part of the problem is people are experiencing like heat much earlier than we've ever seen. And that's across the nation. We're seeing that in where, you see like in New Mexico, they don't have snow caps. There's going to be water consequences. Like we're not building the infrastructure. So when people say, well, heat, I'm like, I do, but I don't know heat 117 degrees in like a second week of June. We shouldn't be breaking triple digits in May. It's impacting things that we've historically had outside, like high school graduations. Our high school graduations start at 7 p.m. when the sun goes down because we can't have people passing out, our children passing out. So that's where the heat protections, the canopies, those things are something that we've invested in as a community and something that we're acknowledging it continues to be a problem. But we also have to admit the drains on our energy. You know, in Tucson Unified, the 20 years that I was there, we moved to HVAC and air conditioning, where before we could have swamp coolers all the way through like, the end of the school year. We couldn't do that anymore. Keep talking about, well, why don't we move things around? We're actually talking about changing when children go to school in order to make sure that they're going when it's cooler because it's dangerous. That's the kind of stuff that we're talking about. And consistently, in August when it's 115, I mean, you can cook an egg, and I'm not exaggerating, on the sidewalk. That's scary. And when you look at Phoenix, it's even warmer because of their concentration of concrete that we don't have as much of in southern Arizona. We have to work on protecting our environment and creating like the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan that we have in Pima County. That's a model that we should be using all over because it's something that, I mean, you can tell as soon as you get here, it's cooler when you have trees and canopies where a lot of communities are being forced to raise open spaces. Our federal lands are being raided, and we have this real push of data centers and mining projects, which are just going to continue to exacerbate the environmental impact that we have on our communities.
Thank you for that. I'm married to an arborist, and so she would love to hear you
Yay.
talking about the real shade benefits of trees. I thank you for being here. I know you might have to head out. Perhaps now.
I'm looking at the nods that are like,
Yeah.
you have to.
But
I'm so sorry. I think that this is a really good, important conversation to have, and one that we have to hold the elected officials that are here representing you here in Congress, but also local elected officials, because that's where it starts. The best solutions, in my opinion, are the ones that start locally for the local solutions and are funded by federal investment, not the other way around.
thank you. Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for your leadership. Feel free to go off to wherever you have to go next.
Thank you very much.
Um, but but I did promise that I would swap in with an equally badass congressional champion on extreme heat. So I'm so happy to welcome Representative Dina Titus. Representative Titus represents the first congressional district of Nevada. She's been doing that for over a decade. Please want to take a seat right here, Representative. She is a senior member of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. She and Representative Stanton of Arizona co-introduced the Extreme Weather and Heat Response Modernization Act, which would empower FEMA, our emergency management agency, to better define and address extreme heat and to provide communities with more resources, including cooling centers, to keep people safe during extreme temperature events. So, Representative, thank you for being here. Thank you for your leadership. I'll catch you up. we've been talking about heat. You probably knew that part.
Yeah, I was gonna say
And we started by talking about that heat. It can be a largely invisible threat for many people. There's sort of this rising inequality and bifurcation of society into the groups of the cool people who don't need to work outside, who have ready access to air conditioning, and the cook people who don't have those luxuries. We've also been talking about, heat is a threat that is more expansive than just it's toasty outside, you're getting sweaty. It really has these significant knock-on impacts on air quality, on respiratory health, on children's health, on recreation, and on development. And so I would just love to get your perspectives as somebody who represents a heat impacted district and communities. How are you seeing heat as both sort of an invisible threat that people can ignore, but we need to tell them not to, as well as like the sort of real impacts and feet on the ground that maybe you're going to overlook?
Well, thank you. Thank you for putting this together because it is a very important topic and it's getting more important.
And
It's
it's
not-
not you want to tilt the mic down, perhaps.
Okay. All right. Kind of low tech, so is that better? So how about I just lean it there?
That's great.
Anyway, I was just saying thank you for y'all putting this together because it's a topic we need to talk about because it's going to get worse, not better. And if we don't do something about it soon, it'll be too late. And that's it's very important. I kind of start where my colleague left off. You ask about what about other states that aren't Nevada? We got 120 degrees in Las Vegas, a record number. We had 300 something died last year, 400 something the year before. So we do know heat, but what about other places that don't? I can tell you that heat is still the stepchild of natural disasters. Anytime you try to argue it with my colleagues, in the language of legislation or regulation, you have to put extreme heat and extreme cold to get their support. And so you can't just talk about heat because they don't get it. And if you think about it, it doesn't play as well because it's harder to measure, takes place over a longer amount of time. Am I interrupting y'all or something?
No, I thought we could be a little cozier because we didn't need all of our seats. So I'm just searching us all.
Yeah, and it doesn't make good TV. Even though more people die from heat than from floods and hurricanes and tornadoes put together, that makes good TV. You can see the result of that storm. You can't quite see the result of extreme heat. So we still have a lot of educating and advocating to do. And that's why this group is so important because you do a good job of that. Think of working outside in 120 degrees. Think of putting a roof on a building in 120 degrees. You look at who is impacted: young children, people with respiratory diseases, people who work outside, pregnant women. And so often they're impacted before they even realize it. You're out jogging or you're on a hike or you're just on a picnic or something, and suddenly you realize that there's been a negative impact on the way you feel. So heat impacts both our lives and our livelihoods. Now you overlay that with the whole question of environmental justice. Where are you going to plant the trees? Where are you going to have the buses go? It makes a big difference from one neighborhood to another. You mentioned those people who can afford the air condition as opposed to those who need some federal subsidies just to pay the power bill. And you have run the whole gamut of the problems that extreme heat create. You mentioned the bill that I'm doing with Mr. Stanton from Phoenix. Thank you for that. Is to get FEMA more engaged in seeing this as a natural disaster and how it can better help, beginning with a council that puts together some plans and then freeing up resources that can be used to help local governments mitigate some of the problems, whether it's cooling stations, two-sided bus stops, planting trees in certain areas. All of those can be part of the solution on the short term. And talking about the long term, that gets harder because the political will is not there right now, for sure, to address climate change. And we know it's there. but they don't want to move off of fossil fuels. They don't want to recognize the impact of heat and water. Look at Lake Mead in Nevada, how it's just going down, down, down. Well, let's build some more data centers so we can use up more electricity and more water. Those are the kind of long-term things. It's probably you're also doing short-term things. So I think that's our challenge. And maybe the way we win some more people over is by being more regional specific. What helps our constituents in Las Vegas is not what you need in Philadelphia or what you might need even in Alaska. So if we can let local governments be engaged in the process, FEMA can supply the resources and the overall approach, and then you can try to accommodate it to where heat matters in different ways in different places. So I would just throw that out for conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a couple of specific points that you made that I want to pick up on. One is the short-termism versus the long-termism, and what can we do today to acutely address these impacts versus what needs to be done to address the underlying driver of heat, climate change. I will just throw out this is a statistic that I read recently that kind of blew my mind. So about 75%, so 3 in 4 heat waves that occurs around the world today is climate linked. So if we didn't have, if we were in a normal climate, that would be 3 out of 4 less heat waves that we would have. So it is really impossible to address heat without addressing climate change. These things are linked. So I want to come back to that in just a second. But before I get there, I want to pick up on the second point that you pointed out, which is that heat and really dealing with sort of the downstream impacts of climate in any community needs to be a very community tailored, locally tailored, community driven effort. And your colleague made this point earlier that dealing with heat in Arizona is very different than dealing with heat in Alaska. We're needing to build homes that can withstand temperatures as high as 100. Yes, now it gets to be 100 in Alaska, but also as low as minus 40 in the winter. And so I wonder if maybe I'll start with you, Representative, and then I'll come back to Paloma and Deirdre, just thinking about kind of that split between what needs to be in the federal bucket and what sort of needs to be more locally tailored and community driven.
Well, usually what needs to be at the federal level is money. Local governments don't always have the resources to address these kind of problems. And the smaller you get, the fewer resources they have to even apply for the money at the federal level. So we need to address that whole chain of how we get the funding to areas that then they can use to solve their problems. Also, I think we have to make legislation that encourages collaboration at the local level. You got to have the RTC and the water district and the local government all sitting at the table to come up with what is the solution. One short-term thing we just recently got in the transportation bill is something you might not think about, but buses in regional transportation commissions were capped at how many buses they can have that sit in reserve. Well, in a hot area, buses break down, asphalt breaks down. You need more buses in reserve or people are going to be sitting out there for longer periods of time. So we got that cap lifted. Now that's something I wouldn't have thought about, but the RTC brought that as an issue, and that's how that collaboration really works. Now, for the long term, you've got to have a federal government with an EPA that's on the right side of things. I think what they're doing now.
Yeah, please.
Speaking of buses, I can tell you firsthand, nothing makes a community happier than a school bus that doesn't pollute. So electric buses, I think, could really be supported at the federal level down to the communities and make almost really, truly an immediate impact, not only for the students who are sitting on the bus absorbing all of that, but the surrounding community as well. I have to say that air conditioning is a nice thing. It was a luxury when I was a kid growing up. It's not really optional anymore. And yet it is a maladaptive response. So more and more air conditioning isn't necessarily the solution. We rely on policymakers to give us certainly the funding, but the political will to pursue renewable energies. And while I'm not immediately, certainly not visually impacted by extraction industry in Alaska, I'm very concerned that, public lands are no longer accessible to average people, or the pollutions and water spill, or like the oil spills, which, by the way, I understand happened just a couple of weeks ago here on the National Mall.
Indeed.
So just the focus on extraction and fossil fuels is a dead end. And if we could shift that money towards renewables, we'll all come out ahead.
I agree. They recently cut back a lot of the headway that we made under the bipartisan infrastructure bill. That was the biggest environmental bill we'd ever passed. So now they've cut back some of the wind, cut back some of the solar projects. Now they're going to put an extra fee on electric cars. Everything is moving in the opposite direction and tearing down. It's so much easier to tear things down than it is to build them back.
Thank you. Deirdre, I know you're over at that table over there, but we haven't forgotten about you. So I'd love to get your voice back into the conversation.
Yes.
Well, I mean, in Las Vegas, as I mentioned before, it's not, the heat causes more wind, which I just found out recently that we had a huge wind events this spring, which of course caused a ton of health problems for myself. It was just hospitalizations. I had 2 hospitalizations, and the particulate matter. Everybody's suffering with allergies, that never used to suffer with allergies, but now everybody's having these problems. My immunologists are overwhelmed with work. My allergist immunology people are just, they've never seen anything like it. And it's those personal experiences that people are having that they're sort of waking up. What's happening to my body? How can I live like this? And so, well, this all comes back to our climate, because the more higher the heat we have, the more wind events we're going to have, the more particulates we're going to have in the air, the more you're going to suffer. So yeah, I hope that we can start to see a little bit of a change in political will in our state when it comes to, electing the right people, electing people that care about these issues. So
One fascinating theme that I'm hearing everybody pull out, and Representative Grijalva did as well, is that heat is really an illustration of this nexus between climate change and human health, both sort of physical health and emotional and mental health. And I think that is fascinating, because when you go out and you poll people on what issues they care about, they don't not care about climate change, but they care about it as way down the list, where the things that rise to the top of the list is sort of 1, the economy, and 2, health. That's why healthcare is consistently an issue. And so I'd like to dig into that a little bit more. Maybe Representative, again, we'll start with you, of how do we stop these from being 2 separate conversations? There's the health conversation over here at the top of the list, and the climate conversation over there at the bottom of the list, and use heat and other unnatural disasters as a motivator for elevating a broader sort of coupled and politically salient conversation at that health climate nexus.
Well, we've got to make it more mainstream, and I think it is becoming more mainstream. Certainly in Nevada, we didn't used to be very environmental. It was all kind of a big desert out there, but now that's not true anymore. And one good example of how this started was recycling. They got children to recycle at school, and then the children went home and shamed their parents into recycling. So something like that seems simple, but it really worked. And so if we can bring these topics into more mainstream like that, so it doesn't seem like the greeny, lefty, wokey kind of policy, it's mainstream more of in urban areas as well as in rural. Now that's, people can identify with that. That helps bridge that gap that you're talking about.
Maybe we'll go back over to Deirdre.
absolutely, we we get wildfires in Nevada, and of course in southern Nevada, where we have pretty extreme heat a lot of times. That smoke is there, but we're also getting it from California wildfires. So when that happens, again, I don't go outside. There's a lot of the years when people like me that have chronic lung disorders, chronic sinus disorders, we just don't go outside. And even when we're inside, we have to have all these air filters and different types of medical equipment that we have to buy to just manage our lives. And just being sick all the time. What kind of life is that? It's really impactful to a lot of people in Southern Nevada. And maybe if we get people a little bit more awake to the fact that it is harming them, but they're suffering because of the climate problems that we're having. Perhaps we could do, perhaps some of the Democratic clubs could do meetings on it or something, Yeah.
Yeah, perhaps we shouldn't need to buy personal protective equipment to live.
Yeah.
I just want to emphasize that the economic costs on human suffering are frankly enormous. And I value everyone here. I value patients I've cared for and their lives, and their suffering is not to be discounted. We're not expendable. And counting those, that level of suffering, even financially, matters. If I've had parents of little kids, if they had an exacerbation and it led to a hospitalization, which is not uncommon, they could be in the hole $5,000-$6,000 from one event, from the parents missing work and the costs of healthcare, astronomical costs of healthcare. I've done catastrophic case management for injured workers. Fairly recently, a roofer, collapsed on a hot afternoon, and he was able to make it home, but he arrived in kidney failure and spent the next 2 weeks hospitalized. And I don't think he was even 30 years old. Another gentleman, an HVAC worker, collapsed in the attic. He has permanent brain damage. He never returned to any capacity of supporting himself or his family. So there are enormous financial costs to this. It isn't just simply turning a blind eye, turn the fan on for longer. An elder, maybe 2 miles from where I live, died in, I want to say it was May of last year, because their utilities were cut off. Because guess what? The heat season starts sooner. There were some policies in place where utilities didn't get cut off, but this individual wasn't protected by them because now that heat season is extended in either direction and by a lot. So policies and people can make a difference.
Thank you for that. I want to make sure I'm not screwing up the run of show. Is now when I'm supposed to open to questions? Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. Okay, so tracking that. Okay, so we'd love to open it up to questions from the audience. Yeah, please. Does somebody have a mic they can run?
Thanks. Hi, I'm Carolyn. To mention a recent poll from Pew, thinking about, thank you so much for being here. This has been extremely, which not manually or human cause. We haven't made a lot of progress since the 90s when this became live. And in fact, I've been heartened by other polling from Yale, which has been showing that consistent Pew Research is a very credible organization. And I know we've often talked in the movement about how resourced the other side is and how disciplined they are with messaging. But it's not enough for us to just say, like, that's the way it is anymore. That's not going to get us out of this problem. So what are some ways that we can, and you touched on some of them, like making this about economics, making this about health. But at the same time, I don't believe climate hushing is the right strategy, which I think a lot of us are going towards.
Representative, do you want to weigh in on that question?
Well, I think what you're doing here today is important. Having you storm the Hill and talk to members of state legislatures and Congress, I think makes a difference. Sending postcards. I mean, people will start to pay attention if they see their constituents are concerned about this, especially if it's an election year. So having organizations like this, look for ways to build coalitions too, I think, whether it's with the ACLU or the NAACP or AARP. You know, I think putting together people who have a common interest, even if they don't quite realize it yet, once they start to hear it, they may want to join the cause, and then it just begins to grow and have more of a voice.
Okay. Were there more questions in the audience? No. And maybe if I can just add my own thoughts on that. There's as we all know, a whole lot of misinformation and disinformation in the ecosystem right now. And so even when you conduct a poll and ask people sort of a question, if you care about climate change or think it's human caused, there's a lot of room for sort of interpretability in both the question and the answer. And the thing that matters the most at the end of the day is the policy solutions, the other types of solutions that are going to either help people deal with climate impacts or address the underlying drivers of climate change, or often both at the same time. Something like planting trees is certainly something that does both simultaneously. It is more about getting support for the stuff rather than selling people on the messaging. Deirdre Paloma, any other reflections on that topic? And maybe otherwise I can introduce just kind of one or two other things to wrap us up.
Why do so many Americans don't not believe in climate change? They don't think it's a real thing. You know, that's very perplexing to me as well. I guess if they don't believe science, right? Then, you know, science has been kind of eschewed, right? So I don't know, better science teachers? I don't know. I don't know. You know, man, how do we get Americans to believe in science? I don't have the answer to that, but we're working on it.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it's about getting away from this question of sort of belief or non-belief.
Yeah.
Right? But still, how do you meet people where they're at about what's the priorities for them and the things that they have the bandwidth to think about in their day-to-day life, and sort of address and adapt policies that can solve for those while also solving for sort of more macro level societal goals. Paloma, did you have any thoughts on that topic?
Well, I think as a nurse, certainly, I tend to have hope, compassion for my fellow human. I think I'd like to see us lean into that. I think as someone who's been around the, you know, I'm a little older, I guess, than most. Elders have wisdom and compassion, and you know, if we can speak up and galvanize around the issue and give an avenue for this action, there's a lot of opportunities and organizations out there that can convene the people, like you said, of like mind. And if we're still in a democracy, we'll fight hard for it, and we deserve to be heard.
Thanks for that. And I appreciate you bringing us back to opportunity and optimism. And that's always where I like to close. So for my last question before we wrap, I just wondered for each of you, kind of what's like the bright spot that gets you up in the morning, or like sort of the creative solution that you've seen start to play out that makes you think like, yes, like this is a tractable problem. We can get a handle on it. A couple that I think about in Phoenix, for instance, which has really took the bull by the horns on heat in the last couple of years. Heat deaths went down last heat season for the first time after several years. So temperatures haven't gotten cooler, but the response has gotten better, and that can really make a difference. In San Antonio, so right in the heart of redder state, they have had for a decade now a program called the roof replacement program, where they will take failing roofs on homes of more vulnerable residents and replace them with cool roofs in ways that can lower attic temperatures by more than 20 degrees and reduce home heat cooling bills over the summer by more than $1,000, they do that for free. Those benefits cascade. So maybe a representative, and then we'll just go down the line. What are one or two of those really bright spots for you?
Well, I'm associated with the university. I taught political science for years at UNLV. So I think when you start to see universities and research centers engage in these kind of day-to-day real world things that people can relate to, that's a plus. I totally agree with you. People don't believe in science. We're in a very anti-intellectual age right now that's encouraged by this administration. I read where I think it was in Missouri, where the state legislature decided they would redefine pi and just leave off about the last 5 numbers, because that was too hard to remember. Well, that's great unless you're going to the moon and you miss it by a couple of jillion miles because you didn't have pi, right? And look at the books that are being taken out of libraries, and it is very anti-intellectual. So if we can engage some research centers like the DRI in Nevada, they're doing cloud seeding in Mongolia. Weather doesn't stop at the border. It goes beyond that. No matter what the weatherman says when he's telling you the weather, it doesn't stop at the state border or national border. If we can get those research institutes involved and look at it from the global standpoint, I think that's encouraging.
Yeah, along those lines, I'm really encouraged at a lot of the global efforts that are happening legally, holding polluters accountable. I think this was just released a couple of days ago. There were 3 teenagers abroad that came up with the science and technology to capture plastics and remove them naturally through, I believe it was tamarind, right? So, and not only that science did that, but teenage scientists did that. So the multi-generational approach there was really encouraging.
And you're
I'm seeing a lot more young people become politically active. We have a chapter of the DSA in Las Vegas that doubled its membership this year. The DSA is very committed to tackling climate change. So there's a lot of young people in there that are very committed to that as well. That's one of the bright spots for me.
very good. The solution, everybody, is teenagers. Okay, that is going to be all the time that we have for today. Before we wrap, I'd love for everybody to first thank Deirdre and Paloma for their community leadership, Representatives Titus and Paula. Thank you so much. And again, thank you to the Climate Action Campaign for giving us this space today. It's all the time that we have for our heat discussion, but it's certainly not all the time that we have for the Museum of Unnatural Disasters. That will be here again through June 14th. Climate change will be here beyond June 14th. Also, thank you to the Center of American Progress for helping with the comms today and some of the wraparound. And then I will also just reintroduce myself, Hannah Safford, and with the Federation of American Scientists. We've been running an extreme heat initiative for several years. We are working on a state and local heat policy agenda that synthesizes a lot of the evidence-based solutions that you heard talked about today into a comprehensive and interactive resource that lets for easy scaling of those solutions. If you're interested in learning more about that, you're welcome to come up to me after the event. You can also reach out to me or my colleague Grace Wickerson, who leads our heat program, and we'd be happy to talk. Thank you again for being here.